Merry Christmas, everyone. Today we have a fun story by one of our listeners. This is Nibble, Nibble by Judy Snyder. Marla sat mindlessly nibbling the popcorn she was meant to be stringing. She reached into the bowl for another piece and came up empty. Looking from bowl to a still nearly bare garland, she sighed, "Not again. Food simply is not safe around me." It was a fact. She carried the bowl back into the kitchen, and while she waited for the air popper to do its thing, she checked the ingredients she'd need to make the gingerbread men with. "You've already checked like a dozen times," the little voice in her head piped up, and this was true. But she had to be sure everything was on hand and ready so that once she started, she wouldn't lose her nerve. She'd been planning this for what seemed a long time and really didn't want to mess up. One by one, she checked them off: flour, ginger, cinnamon, baking soda, nutmeg, salt, brown sugar, molasses, and vanilla extract sat neatly huddled together on the back counter. Going to the fridge, she checked that there were still eggs and enough real butter. Yes, she had everything she needed, including a very special ingredient. Taking the fresh bowl of popcorn to the table, she sat down and began the task of stringing the fluffed kernels again. She hadn't arrived at the decision to kill her husband easily, but it truly seemed the only way. If only he hadn't cheated on her multiple times, and always getting caught saying sorry and promising never again. Never being until the next time, apparently. And now he wanted a divorce so he could marry his latest conquest. She remembered him sitting at the table during dinner and mentioning it in the same tone one would say, "Pass the salt. I want a divorce." Boom. No fanfare, no warm-up, just a simple statement. She had opened her mouth, but David held up a hand. "Marla, there's no point in getting emotional about this. I'm trying to do you a favor. As you know, with the prenup that we both signed, I needn't give you anything at all. If you agree to an amicable, no-fault divorce, you can save yourself a lot in lawyers' fees. I don't want you to think that what you did as my wife went unappreciated, so I put together a package." "A package? You mean like severance pay? I'm your wife, not some employee." Marla spat the words. "Tell me, David, who tended your father when he had his stroke? Who wiped the drool from his chin and cleaned his soiled sheets? And after he finally passed on, and you didn't want your mother to be alone, who was designated to be her nurse and companion? Tell me, David, who did all that for nearly 30 years, freely, willingly, even though it meant my being there 24/7, with barely a break to even go see my family, or to have my own family because you wanted to wait until things settled." She could feel herself glaring at him as she shook with anger. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Marla. You deserve something for all that, which is why I'm willing to offer you something to start over with. Look, I've talked with Mike Hardin. He owns that motel over on Vineyard and Spruce, and he's not only willing to give you a job, but one of the rooms to stay in as part of your pay. Add to that, during the time it takes to finalize the divorce, I will give you $400 expense money a month. A pretty sweet deal, if I do say so myself." David flashed a used car salesman's smile. "What do you say? I'm thinking of your future." Marla didn't have the words to say anything. What she wanted to do was smack that insipid smile right off his face. She did the only thing she trusted herself to do in the moment. She turned and left the room with him calling after her, "Go ahead and think about it. Just remember, something is better than nothing." She walked into their bedroom and closed the door behind her. Leaning against it, she took a deep breath. Breathe. Just breathe. She closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She was far beyond tears, having shed them all in the past year. She tried to focus her mind, to think clearly. She had known about the affair for some time now. All the telltale signs had been in place, so that wasn't much of a surprise, just confirmation. But the divorce, she somehow never thought that he might want one, not that she hadn't thought of it herself. She felt a bit sick and very angry. After all I've done, how could he just cast me aside, especially now when we're so close to retirement age? She was too old to be starting over, at least not like this. She'd been out of the recognized workforce way too long to be qualified for anything but a minimum wage job, if she could even get that. And because she had not been working, her Social Security amounted to nearly nothing, if anything. 30-odd years is a long time between jobs. That damn prenup. David's lawyer father certainly knew what he was doing when he drew that up. She never should have signed it, but she had been young and in love, believing theirs was a forever union. Divorce left her with nothing. But if he should die... Marla recoiled at the thought. Yes, what David was doing was a shameful thing, but worthy of murder? But it isn't murder. It's self-preservation. Payback for all those years of free labor he and his parents got from you, for the life you sacrificed for them. Sure, he has a nice minimal wage job and a room all lined up for you. For how long? Until the ink's dry on the divorce papers? And even if it's a legit offer, what about when you get too old for that? Where's your security? Marla frowned. She was still frowning when she walked back into the dining room and began clearing the dishes, absent-mindedly nibbling on the leftovers as she carried them over to the sink. So many questions whirled in her brain. She didn't even know how long she had to formulate any sort of plan. That's easy. Just ask him. Marla felt herself walk zombie-like into the living room, where David was parked in front of the television drinking a beer. She heard herself say, "David, could I have the holidays before we start the process? They're almost here, and you know the papers would just be lying on some desk until after New Year's anyway." He stared at her a moment, taking a swallow of his beer, and then stared at the bottle in his hands for a moment, as if pondering. "Sure, I guess so. Emily will be at her family home for them, so I guess we can spend it together one last time." "I see. Thank you." Marla turned to leave, feeling a bit detached, as if this was happening to someone else. Emily, damn it. Now she has a name. I don't want to know her name or anything about her. I don't want to think what I do affects anyone but you. "Marla?" "Yes?" She had what she needed. She didn't desire any more conversation with him. "I must say you're taking this all very well." He wasn't sure why, whether it was the way she looked when she glanced back over her shoulder or her tone, but her words, "Why shouldn't I? You've made my choice for me," sent a shiver down his spine. By morning, Marla had a plan, or at least the start of one. She stood in the kitchen with her back against the counter, nibbling Cheerios while waiting for the coffee to be ready. Worst case scenario, you get caught and sentenced to life. The average life expectancy for women is, what, 78? That's only 14 years. Probably get probation in a couple of years. Failing that, at least you die with a full belly and a roof over your head, which beats homeless and destitute. But you won't get caught, not if you're clever. She had watched enough crime shows to think she knew most of the common pitfalls that would lead to failure, so she should be able to avoid them, even if she was also equally right in her suspicion that they left something out of those shows to avoid being a blueprint for getting away with murder. The first thing I need to do is some research. Be best to do that from a public computer, I think. People are always getting caught because of a paper trail or a digital print left behind. Marla, do you plan on just eating from the box, or would you like to try a bowl? She jumped at the sound of David's voice and pulled her fingers back from their journey with a few more crunchy circles to her mouth. He chuckled, removing the box from her hand and helping himself to a bowlful. Good old Marla. You could never break yourself of that, could you? Just like a little kid, everything ends up in the mouth. He sat down at the table, adding milk to his cereal. So, you have plans for today? Marla blinked and stared at him. How could he be acting so normal, as if yesterday had never happened? I thought I might get the Thanksgiving shopping done. It was the first thing to pop into her head. David nodded. Good idea. We may as well go about as usual. No reason to give the neighbors something to gossip about. I think we should keep our divorce as quiet as possible. Don't you? Of course you don't want others to talk about us, or rather talk about you and what a lying cheat you are, Marla thought inwardly, but said, Well, I don't think we need everyone up here in our business, if that's what you mean. Lord knows I don't want people pitying me. Have you told anyone besides that Hardin fellow? Marla felt Hardin could be a loose end. If he knew and things took a twist, the police could see an upcoming divorce as a motive, and who knew who he might have told. I haven't even actually told him, really. He was saying good help was hard to find, and I mentioned knowing someone who would need a job. He said if they were a friend of mine, he could add in a room as well. Heck, Marla, I haven't even seen a lawyer about the paperwork yet. Only Emily knows I was going to bring it up to you. Oh, I see. But yesterday you made it sound like a done deal. Oh, my God, this so works in my favor. Marla fought to hide her relief over that bit of news. Marla, don't worry. Mike always needs good help. There's a job and a place for you, I promise. With that, he wiped his mouth, took a last gulp of coffee, and left for work. And I know exactly what your promises are worth, Marla thought as she watched him leave. Pulling into the parking lot of the public library, Marla felt very anxious. What-ifs danced through her head. What if someone saw what she was looking up? What if she ran into someone she knew? What if... Stop it! Just stop it! This part isn't illegal at all. You aren't looking for a way to obtain an illegal substance, just one that's difficult to get. You're only looking for where you can get it and what it will cost. Besides, who cares about what you do? They say you can find anything on the internet, and you're just verifying that, that's all. Of course, the little voice inside her head was right. No one even looked at her as she sat down in one of the computer cubicles. Not that there was anyone to look, just a few people getting in from the cold for a bit, or, like herself, borrowing the internet. She pretty much had the place to herself, really. It surprised her how quickly she found it. A few taps, several false leads, and there it was. All she needed was to enter her credit card information, and they'd ship it right out. Wait, a credit card can be traced. Think. After a moment, she closed out the computer window and, donning her coat and gloves, nonchalantly wiped the keyboard and mouse off. Just a little added precaution. From the library, she went to the grocery store and bought the makings for Thanksgiving dinner. She wasn't sure if she'd be dining alone or if David would be around, but either way she would need to eat. Standing in line at the cashier's, a display rack of gift cards caught her eye. I should remember to ask David if he wants one for the Secret Santa thing they do at work. Inwardly she sighed. Old habits are hard to break. I shouldn't give a poop what he wants. But they had agreed to act normal. She began glancing over them to see what kinds were offered, when she chanced to see that there were Visa and MasterCard ones as well as Amazon, Starbucks, and the like. What she had just seen didn't really register at first. She was next in line, and she was busy loading the cart contents onto the belt, while the cashier made small talk with her. It wasn't until that evening when she mentioned the gift cards to David did it dawn on her. Credit card gift cards. Those worked just like credit cards, didn't they? She'd only to be sure she got one large enough to cover the expense. The next problem, as she saw it, was the shipping address. She'd rather it wasn't sent directly to the house, but she couldn't see any way around that. She'd just have to take the gamble. This was already Monday, Thanksgiving week. No way she was going near the stores on Black Friday. That was insanity. But the following Saturday there shouldn't be that many at the store where she saw the cards, and the library would be a ghost town in theory. If she ordered it from the computer at the library and then ordered things online from home too, the packages should arrive about the same time. It would be less conspicuous that way. At some point, even though she was lost in thought, she noticed David was just picking at his food. "Are you feeling okay, David? Not getting sick, are you?" Oh, if he contracted the flu right now, it'd be damn near perfect. "Huh?" He looked up from his plate. "Sorry, it's just, well, Emily left for her folks today, and she won't be back until after New Year's." Marla stared at him and started to laugh. She didn't know why it struck her as funny, but it did. "What's so funny?" David demanded. Marla hastily took a sip of water. "I'm sorry, but do you realize how ironic it is that you're expecting sympathy from your wife over your mistress going out of town?" Now it was his turn to stare at her. Slowly his mouth began to quirk, with a small laugh escaping, and nodding his head, he said, "You're right, only I'd say it was more pathetic, but you did ask what was wrong." "That's true, I did. Now eat up, David, or you really will get sick. I heard there's a really nasty bug going around." It surprised her, despite the fact that he was leaving her, and despite the fact that she was going to kill him, that they could still laugh like this. "That's the real problem, I guess. After all you've done and are doing to me, I still don't hate you. I should, and if circumstances were different, maybe I wouldn't end you, but you made that choice for me." The next couple of days she spent baking pies, and then, of course, she spent all of Thursday morning cooking a meal for two that could feed a small army. David was already digging into his second plate before she had even gotten halfway through her first plate. "This is really good, Marla. You outdid yourself again this year. Yes, sir, if there's one thing I know I'll miss, it's your cooking." He looked over at her. "You know, if you'd just get a handle on all that nibbling you do, you'd eat more of an actual meal. One of these days you're liable to find yourself munching on a Tide Pod or something just as bad." Marla nodded and listened to him prattling on about various things. "For over a year, you barely said more than 3-word sentences to me, and now that you're leaving me, you won't shut up. Is this some weird way to assuage your guilt?" "Hey, look what I've got." David held up the wishbone. "Break it with me?" "Why not?" Marla took one end of the Y while he took the other. "Okay, ready. 1, 2, 3, pull." The bone, not being dry, didn't give the satisfying crack when it broke, but more of a spongy, ripping sound. David held up his end. "I get to live the longest." "But I get a wish." Marla placed the pieces with the other bones. "Tell me what you wished for." "Oh, that's easy. To live longer than you." While she was clearing the dishes, she almost felt relieved when he excused himself to make a call. She almost didn't care that she knew who he was calling, even though he didn't say. Saturday went exactly as she planned. The store was almost shopper-free, and the cashier barely glanced at her purchases, just scanned them in. The library practically had tumbleweeds, so she completed her mission unnoticed. Back home, she placed her shopping on the counter, a roll of gift-wrapping paper, Scotch tape, and several gift cards. David could choose which one he wanted for his Secret Santa, and the others she'd wrap and put in their stockings. Oh yes, she was taking this making thing look normal to the hilt. She was even going to order him a few things online. It would help her story. I ask you, members of the jury, why would she buy him gifts if she was just going to kill him? That doesn't make sense. Everyone knew there only had to be reasonable doubt. That was if she got caught. And if she was, she wanted a plan B all set. Waiting for the packages to arrive, Marla kept herself as busy as she could, but she couldn't help but have bouts of anxiousness. Would it arrive in time? Would her scheme really work? Did she remember how much for a lethal dose? And she would caution herself to have patience. Everything would be fine. All the packages had a delivery date of within a week. Plenty of time. Happily, the day they did arrive, David was at work. The box labeled Chem Lab was a bit larger than she had imagined, but on opening it, she discovered that the small amber-colored bottle was just well padded. After hiding the bottle away in her dresser drawer, Marla carefully peeled the shipping labels from the box. Fetching a small saucer, she tore them and the receipt to bits and used a lighter to burn them. When it was nothing but ash, she dumped the remains down the disposal, and then carefully washed and dried the dish, putting it back. There, now there's nothing to identify the carton with me, she thought as she flattened it and placed it in the recycling bin, along with the other packaging from the post. By the time any investigation, if there was one, took place, it would have been taken away, one piece of cardboard among many. Marla had nearly finished stringing the second bowl of popcorn. She glanced over at the tree, already festooned with a few popcorn garlands. She nodded to herself. Yes, this should be enough to finish the task. Then she'd put the present she bought herself and David under the tree. Circumstances being what they were, she wasn't sure she could rely on him to get anything for her, and she didn't expect him to, but for appearance's sake, she thought there should be something. She looked over to the counter where the baking ingredients sat. Tomorrow was the day. She'd have the gingerbread baked and frosted by the time David came home from his office party. It was tradition that they closed down early and had a potluck-type buffet, learn who their secret Santa had been for the week, and in all probability get tipsy because someone would spike the eggnog and punch. He wouldn't want a full meal. However, she knew gingerbread was a great weakness of his. He wouldn't be able to resist. That night, Marla found it difficult to fall asleep. It was a queer sort of excitement that coursed through her. She supposed part of it was the rush of going to do something that most of society would deem wrong. No one who ever knew her would believe she was capable of such a thing. Even she had a hard time believing it. She did feel some remorse, not for what she was about to do, but for not being able to think of another way. By standing by the prenup, David had left her with no choice. She turned over in bed and looked at his sleeping form. "I'm sorry, but you brought this on yourself." This is it. No turning back now, Marla thought to herself as she pulled out the large mixing bowl. Her recipe would make 24 cookies, but she thought she'd only need to poison 6 of them. Although she had learned what the lethal dosage would be, she could find nothing on if it could be cooked into food. Traditionally, it was added to drinks or in soups. Would baking it alter its chemical composition and render it useless? She wouldn't risk that. This was a one-shot deal for her. With multiple attempts, the odds of getting caught increased. The thing was, with David, she couldn't be sure what he'd wash it down with. Might be milk, might be beer. She was only sure he'd eat at least 2 or 3 cookies, so it had to be in the cookies. She was fairly certain she had devised a way. She rolled out the dough, cut and baked the cookies as usual. Then, when they were cool, she set aside 6 of them. These would be her assassins. Measuring out the doses and using a small brush, she coated each one with a clear, toxic liquid. Giving it a moment to sink in and dry, she flipped them and repeated the process. She smiled. The gingerbread absorbed it beautifully. Now all that remained was to decorate them. But first she must dispose of the evidence. She rinsed out the brush and flicked out the excess water, then carried it out to the garage, placing it in a jar with half a dozen other brushes in the cabinet where David kept the household paints. Unless one had reason to look for it, they'd never find it. Returning to the kitchen, she took a moment to remove her partials and rinse off the bits of raisins that had stubbornly clung, making their fit feel a bit off. That's what you get for nibbling the sticky things, even though they do make good eyes. She put the acrylic teeth back in her mouth before picking up the small, damning bottle. She couldn't just toss it in the bin. How many shows had she seen where that had been one of the first places they searched? Crap! Why hadn't she thought of this before? Think! She moved about the kitchen, rinsing out the mixing bowl and other baking utensils and putting them in the dishwasher. Come on! You're in the home stretch now. Don't go getting sloppy. Marla frowned and poured herself a cup of coffee. She needed to relax and think clearly. She sat on a high stool next to the counter. She picked up a cookie. Nibble, nibble. Its texture was wonderful, slightly crisp on the outside, giving way to softness as it bent to the teeth, then released a small shower of crumbs. Marla chewed as she thought about the bottle. Nibble, nibble. She broke off another piece and then stared at the poor gingerbread man, now void of arm and a leg. Grief, and you aren't even frosted yet. She looked over at the other counter where the assassin cookies sat. Good thing I sat over here. She laid the cookie back down on the sheet with the other ones and decided to take a walk around the house, looking for the ideal hiding place for the bottle. In the living room she stopped by the tree. The scent of pine filled the air, mingling with the newly baked gingerbread smell. She was glad she had convinced David to go with a real tree. That's when inspiration hit. Getting down to the floor, she crawled to the back of the tree and slid the skirt open. She took the bottle and slipped it between the trunk and the tree holder. It was a snug fit, but good enough. She then pulled and smoothed the skirting back into place. What she hadn't planned was needing to crawl over to the armchair so that she could pull herself back up to a standing position. Getting old sucks, she thought, as her knees groaned with the effort. She scrutinized the scene. Perfect. When David came home, Marla was frosting the cookies. My, someone's been busy, he said with a smile. And for just a moment, a small tick of the clock, Marla was taken back to when they were still in love. That was quickly shattered when his cell phone rang and he answered, "Hi, babe," as he left the room. On his return, Marla noticed he had taken the time to change from his suit and tie into more comfortable attire. "I hope you didn't put too much effort into dinner. I really overindulged at the party." "Dinner?" Marla blinked as if it was a foreign word. "Oh, dinner. I'm sorry. Time got away from me. I haven't even started it yet." "That's okay. Like I said, I'm not really hungry. What do you say you take the night off and we order a pizza?" David lifted a gingerbread man from the plate closest him. Marla watched as he decapitated it in one bite. "Sounds good to me." Marla wondered how long it would take. "Would you like a glass of milk with that?" She nodded at the rapidly vanishing man. "Don't bother, I'll get it." David went to the fridge and pulled it open, retrieving the carton of milk. Straightening, he found that Marla had already gotten him a glass. He filled it, sitting the carton on the counter as he stuffed the rest of the assassin number 1 in his mouth. Assassin 2 followed suit, being washed down with the milk, while Marla ordered the pizza. Assassin 3 followed a bit more slowly. David wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, dropping the torso back onto the plate. He leaned heavily on the counter. "Man, I'm not feeling so great." "What's wrong?" Marla feigned innocence. "I feel kind of sick to my stomach. Probably just ate too much is all." "If you aren't feeling well, maybe you should go to bed." David stood, but didn't seem very steady on his feet. "Yeah, maybe I should lie down." Marla helped him to bed and then left, returning with a plastic bag to line the waste paper basket with. She sat it next to the bed, saying, "Just in case, I hope it isn't that flu that's going around." "Yeah, great way to start the holidays, huh?" "Well, you just rest. I'm sure you'll be better soon." With that, Marla turned off the light and went back to the kitchen. She paced back and forth. How long until it was over? She was sure she had given him more than enough. Just one cookie should have done the trick, and he'd eaten nearly 3. She passed by the plate, holding the assassins. She wasn't aware she'd even picked one up. Snap went a leg as her fingers broke it off and began to carry it to her mouth. The sound of the doorbell caused her to jump. "Calm down, it's only the pizza guy." She laid the cookie back down on the plate and went to the door, not even noticing how close she had come. She placed the pizza on the counter and, going to the bedroom, peeked in. David was curled in the fetal position, softly moaning, with an occasional groan. Quietly, she closed the door and returned to the kitchen. She sat at the counter thinking, "Well, something seems to be happening. How long should I wait to call the authorities?" She didn't want to wait too long, but then again, she definitely didn't want a chance of them resuscitating him. If that comes up, I'll tell them that he had said he didn't want that, or to donate his organs either. She wasn't sure if just saying that would be enough, and she couldn't present a DNR, but it would be worth a shot. The organs, though, they had to respect that. Marla had read somewhere of a person being caught when the organs they had donated had tested with elevated levels of some toxin. That would not be her mistake. She would also have him cremated. What am I missing? There's something, I know it, but what? She drummed her fingers on the pizza carton, then picked it up and put it in the fridge. This wasn't any good. She was too nervous to sit still. Think! She wished she had a checklist, but she hadn't trusted putting anything in writing. But if she had done so, what would it say? In her mind, she went back to the beginning. The card she had used was deposited in a public trash bin just outside of the library. It would be long gone. Same with the cardboard box she had carefully delabeled. Neither was anywhere on the premises. The bottle had been well hidden, to be disposed of later. But she was still missing something. Marla frowned as she snapped a piece of cookie off. David had eaten almost 3 of them. Marla froze, staring at the plate, then at the piece that was nearly halfway to her lips. She swallowed hard and tossed it back on the plate. She frantically counted the little men, the piece David had left, and 3 more. Oh, God, one's still missing a leg. Had she eaten it? Frantically, she moved the cookies about. No, there it was. She breathed a sigh of relief. All the bits were accounted for. No nibbling, not this time, she thought as she picked the plate up and walked to the sink. She turned on the faucet and flicked the disposal switch and watched her sweet assassins swirl down the drain. She rinsed the plate and placed it in the dishwasher and started the machine. If David cried out in pain, she didn't want to hear it. Getting a new plate, she placed another 6 of the golden brown men on it and sat it on the counter. The remaining 11 nicely filled the cookie jar. Marla finally felt as if all the boxes had been ticked on her mental checklist. She looked at the clock and then went to check on David. He certainly didn't look the way she imagined someone who had been poisoned would, and if it wasn't for his cold, staring eyes, she would have thought him asleep. She shook his shoulder just to be sure and called his name. Nothing. She took her hand mirror and held it in front of his nose and mouth, and it didn't fog. A numbness she couldn't explain crept over Marla. She felt neither happy nor sad, just numb. Moments later, she was dialing the emergency number. "I can't wake my husband. I don't think he's breathing." Within a week, all the arrangements had been made, and Marla sat at the kitchen counter looking at the life insurance check. It was for much more than she had thought. Between that and the survivor benefits as David's widow, as well as his pension, she could live rather well. Not rich well, but very well indeed. She picked up the last remaining gingerbread man and smiled. "Merry Christmas to me. Nibble, nibble."